Alumni Hall, where you'll find officially licensed FSU gear for the entire family, including brands like Nike and Champion, plus great gifts for your favorite Seminole and home decor, too. Miss some of the old Seminole throwback logos? Check out our College Vault collection. Shop online at alumnihall.com and let our great customer sales team ship to you within days. Or pick up in store in Tallahassee. You'll find us in the Miracle Plaza Shopping Center on Thomasville Road. Students and military get 10% off in store, and Osceola subscribers get 20% off in store and online with their digital membership cards. Alumni Hall. It's the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines. For more on the Seminoles, including Osceola's coverage from veteran Seminole insiders, message boards, Osceola virtual happy hours, and more, go to theosceola.com.
Welcome to the Seminole Sidelines podcast. We usually talk a little bit of football, but this time of year, baseball getting deep into the season, and we welcome Eric Luallen, the voice of the Florida State baseball team. Seminoles will be in Atlanta this weekend for Georgia Tech. Seminoles are 18-14. They're ranked 25th in one poll. Georgia Tech's ranked 20th in another poll. So we're seeing this is a pretty big weekend as far as you look at it, big picture for both teams. They're both kind of on the edge of, potentially being a regional host, potentially being a number two at an SEC site. We've seen, D1baseball.com, for example, has Florida State slotted to Starkville as a number two at the Mississippi State Regional. But welcome, Lulu. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, anytime.
So the Seminoles, this is, like we said, it's a big weekend series. I like to think this is a really fun team to watch. And it's fun because of the starting pitching. You got Parker Messick on Friday, and Bryce Hubbard's been up and down, but when he's good, he's really good, gives you a chance to win. Connor Grady, always, I feel like he's a bulldog. I feel like that's the word that I keep coming back to with him. He gives you a really good chance in those Sunday golds to get a win. But how important do you think is this weekend? You hate to put too much on three specific games, but how important is this weekend?
It's gotten to that point where I've said it on the air a few times. Every time we get to, and not only an ACC series, but even a Tuesday night game, it feels like this game is really important, and it has felt that way. And I think a lot of it has to do with the sprint nature that this season feels like. And I know it sounds weird to say, well, you're playing 50 games instead of 56. That's not a huge difference. It is 10% of the season. So you are lessening the season by more than 10% of your games, 6 out of 56, and only playing 50. So it's given the season more of a feel of a sprint rather than a long distance run. And it has kind of given, I think not only the weekend series, but the weekday games as well, it's given them all more of an aura of importance when it comes to how this season has played out. And I think a lot of that has to do with kind of the nature of how the schedules have played out this year, that there isn't uniformity around all of college baseball. The SEC is playing 56 games and playing, a more normal conference schedule. ACC is playing 50 games, but 6 more conference games. The Big Ten is playing conference only. And so they're playing a 40-game conference only schedule. And I think that all of that it's created more of an urgency because you don't know how that all shakes out when the selection committee finally does sit down and decide, they're going to decide right around now. They're deciding who's going to be hosting regionals. They're not waiting until the end of May. But then when they do finally sit down and decide what the field looks like, who's going where, who's going to be seated what, it's just kind of giving it all more of a sense of urgency because there's just too many unknowns. There are more unknowns than what we normally have to face. So they all feel that way. And, I think this one, it's a road series against a team that's similarly situated in the conference when it comes to seeding for the conference tournament. So it gives you more importance there. There's a premium with the way the format is in the ACC tournament now for being one of the top 4 seeds. 1 and 2 are going to be the 2 division winners, and then it's the next best records, the next 2 best records, regardless of division. And the only way to lose a game and advance to the semifinals is to be one of the top 4 seeds. You can't lose a game and advance to the semifinals if you're not one of the top 4. So that gives you a lot of importance because of where you're situated compared to the team you're playing. Georgia Tech could also be one of those teams battling for one of those top 4 seeds. So, yeah, it's all of those factors that give it that feel.
Yeah, it's a really unusual year. Bids for baseball postseason were due, I think, right around April 12th,
right,
13th, 14th. They're making selections early to mid-May. It feels like we'll know around, May 12th, I think, or so?
I think it was either the 12th or the 14th, I believe, is when they said they were going to announce the sites. And they said they were going to get, and again, they're receiving those bids in April, and they said they were going to give weight to how a team was playing at that time when they announced it in May. Well, what happens if you win your last 10 games and, were you not considered because you went on that run through the end of the regular season in your conference tournament? Do you lose out on a host bid because of that? Here's another thing to consider. You've got some schools that have opened up attendance far more than others. So as far as bidding for the postseason, if schools A, B, C, and D are willing to just open up the gates and allow 100% attendance, is that factoring in, or is that going to be a negative for them? Is the NCAA going to say, hey, look, this is an NCAA event and we could potentially have some blowback on us, and we don't want to accept any potential liability? We don't know how this is going to be looked at.
As Pat's brother Shane once said, we are flying the plane while we are building it during this pandemic. So all things are up in the air until we have to make an emergency landing and try to figure things out again. Well, hey, I've done just some cursory research on Georgia Tech. I know you've probably gone a little bit deeper on them. They are 18-14, 14-10 in the ACC. They've got some hitters.
Yeah, definitely.
Not a big power lineup, maybe. Not big bats like, say, a Matt Nelson, a Robbie Martin type, but they've got 5 guys hitting over 300, led by Kevin Parada, and some good pitchers. Some guys who are averaging about a strikeout to an inning. ERAs that are not overwhelming, let's be honest, but this feels like a very competitive, good 3-game series.
Yeah, they're looking at the offensive numbers. They're a very good offensive lineup. They're averaging, I want to say, somewhere around 6.5 runs per game. So they do hit the ball well. I do think that their ballpark sets up well for what our hitters are accustomed to. It's a much shorter porch to right center and to right field, not so much to straight away right field, but to right center than left center. I think it's like 355 to 385, talking about alleys between right and left. So for a lineup, that's left-handed heavy and right-handed guys who are used to trying to go the other way to take advantage of that short porch here, I think the ballpark sets up well for Florida State. But it's going to be, again, I looked at Louisville as the matchup between the team with the best ERA in the league and the team allowing the fewest runs per game against the team scoring the most runs per game. And I think that this is similar from that aspect. As far as, Georgia Tech, good offensive lineup. Florida State has really done a fantastic job pitching. I think that Georgia Tech's starters their starters don't have numbers that jump out at you, but their starters do look like they're very good. They may not have the shutdown numbers that you see out of some other programs, but they're starters that are going to go out there and they're never, we talk about Connor Grady on Sunday all the time. He's a guy that's going to go out and do his job, and he's not going to beat himself and not going to put his team in a bad situation. And I think Georgia Tech's starters, all 3 of them on the weekend, are a lot like that. They're guys that are going to go out and they're going to get you 6 innings, 7 innings. You may get 3 or 4 runs off of them, but they're never going to. They don't give up a lot of big innings. They don't do a lot of those things. If you can find a weakness there with Georgia Tech, it's probably their bullpen. Some of the bullpen numbers are a little bit iffy, but you've got to take advantage of opportunities if that's going to be the case. You've got to get starting pitchers out of there, but that's one of the things that again, they're pretty good about their starters going fairly deep into games.
And a couple of good connections too with these teams. James Ramsey's the hitting coach at Georgia Tech, of course, played here 2009 to 12. Florida State's got a couple of Georgia guys on the roster between Wyatt Crowell, Davis Hare. So it'd be kind of a homecoming and some nice reunions there.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of guys that Wyatt Crowell played with in high school on the Georgia Tech roster, and you mentioned Ramsey. He's a guy that he was here for a semester. And some of the guys still playing at Florida State were here for that one semester that he was on the coaching staff before he got that job at Georgia Tech. Obviously, Rammer's a guy that Meat's got a soft spot for. Tyler Holt played with him, coached with him. It'll be fun for those guys to compete against one another and for players who know one another to compete against one another. I think it's going to be a fun series from that angle as well.
Yeah, I think what's fun about this team beyond the pitching has been, really fun to watch each night. But Matthew Nelson has just been consistently putting together, I think, one of the better Florida State seasons for a hitter that we've seen in quite some time. I mean, we can run through a ton of numbers with Matt Nelson, and we really shouldn't forget he's throwing out runners. He's handling the pitching staff quite well.
Right.
That's an intangible. It doesn't show up in the box score. But his numbers are getting pretty silly. I know you've got some numbers, and Stephen McCartney has given me some numbers. I want to run a few by you and have you run a couple that you've got too. I was curious about the splits, how Matt was hitting lefties and righties and all that. Against lefties, it's 342. Against righties, it's 315. And with runners in scoring position, it's 417. It just shows you it's not just, hey, he's seeing guys from one side of the better than others. It's he's coming through when guys in front of him are walking or getting singles, he's getting those runs home. And you hate in this sport to say one guy has made a huge difference, and he's certainly not carrying this team. But there are definitely times where a 3-run home run against Boston College or a big hit has really just kind of given that jolt of momentum and enthusiasm, I think, for this lineup.
Well, and I think I think that's a very good point. The timeliness of some of the hits that he's come up with. I know that one of the prevailing themes has been Florida State relying on the big inning, but it in a lot of cases, it hasn't really been big innings. It's been one big moment where Florida State has gotten 2 or 3 runners on, and Nelly has come up in that situation and delivered. So it hasn't been like, they strung together and 9 batters came to the plate and they scored 5 or 6 runs. It's been a couple of guys get on and then he delivers. And that's how that big inning happens. So maybe it's only a 5 or 6 batter inning that he's turned into a crooked number on the scoreboard because he's delivered that big hit. And that's such a huge, huge thing for a baseball team. And it feels like the moments that it's happening to are, you're down 1-0 or you're down 2-0 or you're down 5-3, or it always feels like when he delivers that moment, it's when Florida State finds themselves on the short end of the scoreboard and it flips the game. And I think you can't say enough about that. But, you brought up another good point. Not only what he does offensively, but what he is able to do handling pitchers, what he does blocking balls. Jim Bellinger, he can be pretty confident in a 1-2 count or a 2-2 count in calling with runners on base, in calling for a pitcher to throw a slider or a curveball in the dirt and to try to get a guy to chase it. And that's a big factor in why Florida State strikes out so many batters. Well, the reason he's got the confidence to do that is what Matt Nelson's able to do behind the plate. And he's got the confidence to ask his pitchers to do that because he knows that Matt Nelson can handle that and can make sure that ball doesn't get to the wall and allow people to advance. So I think all of those things are a big factor in the performance of this team, where they end up on the scoreboard, how the pitchers are performing, all of those things. And he plays into all of that. And it's really just huge for the team. And, it's funny. You might look at the numbers and try to compare them to past seasons and look at a comparison of Matt Nelson. Here we're in, what do we play? 32 games, 18 and 40. Yeah. 32 games. And look at his numbers in the context of what people have done over full seasons. And you can kind of lose some of the context of what he has done so far this year. And you mentioned Steve McCartney sending you numbers, and Stephen and I were talking back at Louisville. I talked to him and I said, hey, you know what? I looked, and the highest home run total we've had since 2010. So starting with the 2011 season, the bats were changed to what we currently use, the bat standards, after the 2010 season. It made a huge difference in offensive output. The bats were changed prior to the 2011 season. The highest home run total in a season since the change in the bats, it was Drew Mendoza in 2019 with 16 home runs. And we see with Nelly, he's already at 15. So Steven, when I told him that, and I actually gave him a list, I think it was everybody who had hit 13 or more home runs since the bats were changed. And he went back and did a game by game. How many games did it take guys to get to 15? Because that's where Matt is now. And he didn't do total number of games that guys had played in. He did total number of team games. Because you have to remember, Matt's also missed a couple of games and come out early a couple of times because of various issues. And that's another thing that I think gets lost in this, how the guy doesn't take a day off. And Meats talked about this. He's wanted to give him a day off. Matt won't come out of the lineup. But he's gotten kind of beat up this year too. He's taking balls off the thumbs. He's, all kinds of things like that. So he's been able to fight through all of those little issues as well to produce the way he's producing. But Matt Nelson has gotten to 15 home runs quicker than all but 3 players in Florida State history. So Steve McCartney, again, who does an outstanding job as Florida State Sports Information Director for baseball, he went back and looked throughout history. And the only 3 players who got to 15 home runs quicker in the course of the season, Jeff Ledbetter, who, of course, had a 42 home run season back in 1982, took him 12 games. Now, I will preface that, not to diminish that accomplishment, but Jeff Ledbetter was a left-handed hitter with no screen and right at Hauser. Mike Fuentes, who won the Golden Spikes Award in 1981, took him 27 games in 1981 to get to 15 home runs. And Chris Cawthon, who also played in 1982 with Ledbetter, it took him 27 games to get to 15 home runs. And again, Cawthon was a left-handed hitter playing in Hauser with no screen. Matt Nelson, it took him 31 games. And again, he didn't play in 2 of those. So he did it in 29 games. He did it in 31 team games. But to kind of throw some other context for people who don't necessarily remember the Mike Fuenteses and Jeff Ledbetters of Florida State lore, J.D. Drew had his 30-30 season in 1997. It took him 32 games. So it took him one more team game than what Matt Nelson dealt with. Trying to think, Buster Posey. Meat brought this up the other day. He said that Buster had like 7 or 8 home runs at the halfway point. I went back and counted it up. The halfway point of the regular season, Buster had 9 home runs. He ended up with 26 in 2008. He actually had 7 home runs in the final 9 postseason games. So he was at 19 through regular season ACC tournament, which that season, again, they played 56 regular season. They played, I think, 4 in the ACC tournament that year. So he was at 60 games and was at 19 home runs, where Matt Nelson hit 15 in 31 games. So just to kind of put those numbers in perspective, that's really that's doing something. Different bats than what Buster Posey was playing with. So I don't know that we're really and maybe it's because we're midway through the season or a little more than midway through the season. I don't know that we're really able to yet appreciate exactly what kind of year Matt Nelson's had at the plate. Here's another one for you from a consistency standpoint, or not necessarily consistency, but from how does he deal with his own internal adversity? I remember going back prior to the North Carolina series, I noticed that he had not had back-to-back games without a hit at all this year. So in other words, if he went a game without a hit, he was getting a hit the next game. You could bank on it. And of course, as soon as I brought that up on the air, North Carolina, first 2 games of the Carolina series, he went back-to-back games without a hit. So I brought it up after the first one. I brought it up in the Saturday game in North Carolina. I'm like, well, here are his numbers bouncing back. The game after he goes without a hit, he's done this, and he goes 0 for again. And now I'm like, oh, great. I cursed him. But since those back-to-back games against North Carolina, he's 12 for 32 with 5 home runs, and that's in 9 games. So, just the consistency, the ability to not let one bad game turn into 2 or 3 or 4, which can happen with guys. All of it, it's just been the total package for him this year.
Yeah, I feel like we're watching a future major leaguer, to be quite honest. I mean, this is a guy who could have gone in the draft had it been an extended draft in 2020 with only 5 rounds. We think the draft will go about 20 rounds potentially this June. And
I don't think that's going to be an issue for him this year.
Yeah. Matt Nelson should go, pretty high. I think he's going to be up there in demand for sure. And there's a lot of great.
I got a text message during a game. It's been within the last week or two, and I don't even remember what Matt Nelson did at that. And it wasn't a home run that he hit. It was something that he did defensively. And I got a text message from an editor at MLB.com that said, I think that guy might be making some money playing ball soon. And so people are really noticing him. And, I know we've gone places and scouts have been there specifically to watch somebody else, and they've taken notice of him. Not that they didn't know about him before, but, when they show up somewhere to watch somebody specifically and you draw their notice away from that person that they're there to watch specifically, it says a lot about what you're doing.
I agree. And another guy who's really been consistent after a pretty sluggish start, I think, has been Robbie Martin.
Yeah.
He's now had 100 RBI. Going into the BC series, he had 100 RBI in 108 games. So that says a little bit of something about just how, you're going to fight it some nights against some pitchers. You're going to be a lefty at a mismatch against some lefties. But in the end, you're going to be pretty productive with runners in scoring position. He's another kid. I think he's really fun to watch hit.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact, Robbie's first 30 at-bats this year was when he was struggling. But since that point, since kind of turning that around, I looked in the last 18 games, he's been in a range it's been such a tight range that speaks to his consistency. In 18 games, he hasn't been lower than 310. He hasn't been higher than 326. So, I mean, that tells you the consistency you can expect out of him. And he's another one, if he has one game without a hit, you can almost kind of bank on 2 or 3 hits the next game just because of how consistent he's been and what he's been able to accomplish this year.
I don't want to touch too much on the downside, but I think this is a good time of the year for Florida State to have exam week, to not have a midweek game. You've got 5 or so days where you can kind of, tweak mechanics. You can take infield, work on your fielding. There are some guys in the lineup who, they're still under 200. It's been a really rocky 32 games for a lot of guys. But this is a good time of year for guys to kind of mentally recalibrate. We've seen, Nander has had success focusing on hitting right-handed, for example. He's had a couple of big hits, a couple of big home runs, come through with some RBIs, but he's at 194. We've seen Reese really struggle, through the shoulder, through the concussion. He just hasn't gotten in gear. I think, do you see situations with some of these guys where this is a good time of the year for the coaching staff to say, hey, okay, let's just get back into the fundamentals. Let's look at your swing. Let's review some film, kind of just see where you are and what we can do to help you, because we love you. We're not benching you. You're part of the future of where we're going, but we just need to see a little bit change in approach or change in something moving forward, for this stretch run.
Well, and I think you can see historically, and I can't come up with specific examples. I haven't looked that deep into it, but historically, you can certainly find examples of the team itself playing much better once school ended. 17 and 19 are 2 years that really stick out to me, because that happened in those years. 17 and 19 were years where, people had kind of labeled us for dead. And, this is going to be the year Florida State doesn't make the postseason. And, I can remember all of those things in 17 and 19. And then, 17, we had that just the awful feeling of the end of the Wake Forest series, which was the last home series of the season. And you're going to Louisville, and, it wasn't a good feeling at all. Go to Louisville, win 2, get rained out on the final day of the regular season, stay in Louisville, win the ACC tournament, and you end up in the College World Series. That was what did we lose on the road in Blacksburg in 17 on Sunday? I think 16-0, 17. It was something terrible. 19 was another season that it's funny. Everybody was saying, man, this is the worst Florida State team I can remember seeing. And I kept saying, I don't know, this feels a lot like 17 to me. And it ended up playing out a lot like 17 did. And that team that team had to go on the road and regional and super regional, and they go to Georgia and win the Georgia regional. They go to super regional at LSU and win the first 2 games. They don't even need a third game and get to the College World Series that way. So, I think there certainly are examples of when this team, look, what can happen in that time is these guys, they become more, they're more baseball player than they are student. The student part of it goes away, and Meats called it that pro experience, but it's also a chance for them, as much time as they spend together, it's a chance for them to spend even more time together. And, a lot of times as a team, you can gel in that particular atmosphere, and you can come together and really start playing well. And I think we've seen that with Florida State in the past. And certainly you hope that happens again this year.
Yeah, you mentioned the Louisville experience, that prolonged stay in 17. 19, I was driving up to Athens thinking, this is going to be interesting. Are we seeing the final games of Mike Martin Sr. of 11? And then the bats are incredible. And the pitching was really good, that regional 2 in Athens. And it just kept going. It just kept going.
You bring up a good point. I think everybody felt that way. Kyle Peterson drew into Athens for ESPN. It wasn't because they wanted to send their number 1 team to Athens. It was because Kyle's got that much sway at ESPN. And in his mind, and I talked to him in Athens. He said, look, he goes, I wanted to be here because if this is where it ends, I wanted to be here for the end of 11's run. And then, we win Athens, we go to LSU, and he's in LSU again. That was, everybody kind of had that feeling, but that team came together and was playing excellent baseball by the end of the year.
Yeah, I think moral of the story is don't count Florida State out at any time. As I've said this whole season, they are very capable of taking 2 out of 3 from anybody in the conference. And they've honestly been capable of dropping 2 out of 3. And part of it is, hey, the errors have contributed. I think the pitching has the pitching maybe exceeded expectations in some regards. It just feels like it's been so good with Parker. And even a guy like Carson Montgomery has struggled at times, but against Florida down in Gainesville, he was so good working around those errors. Yeah. You saw a young freshman who was battling. I feel like we're seeing young pitchers, and it's just really fun to watch them on the mound.
Well, and I think too, I think we focus so much on the starting pitching. I think we've kind of lost sight of the bullpen. And it's become a situation where, look, bullpens are going to have games where things don't all come together the way they normally do. The bullpen, the first 2 games of Boston College, didn't give up a run. So on Sunday, when they gave up a couple of runs in that final game of the Boston College series, somebody texted me and said, "What's wrong with the bullpen?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" Well, you've had one game. I went back and looked at some numbers too, because, I'm weird like this. One thing that is not an official stat that's kept is inherited runners. So when a guy comes into a game and he inherits runners on base, what does he do? Florida State's bullpen this year has allowed 30 inherited runners to score out of 112. The major league average in 2020 was 32%. So we're talking the best pitchers in the game of baseball, their bullpens on average are allowing 32% of inherited runners to score. And Florida State, that's a pretty big sample size. 112 is a pretty big number, and they've only let 30 runs score. And you compare that to Georgia Tech. And the reason I went back and did this is Georgia Tech actually gives you what their bullpen numbers are in that. So I wanted to see how Florida State compared to that. And Georgia Tech is somewhere around 50%. So, again, comparing it to what other schools are doing, I think that speaks volumes into just how good this bullpen has been. But I think it's gotten overshadowed by how good the starting pitching has been. Parker Messick is on the Golden Spikes watch list, and he's got ACC Player of the Week. He's got John Olerud Player of the Week. So we've noticed what he's done. At one point, Bryce Hubbard had the lowest batting average against among starters in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Connor Grady has been steady Connor, and we talk about him a lot. So I think the bullpen's kind of gotten lost in that. And one of the numbers that really, I've had people again ask me, why do they go to Chase Haney so much? I think there's an obvious answer there. 6 years, 5 of those he's been active. He had the 1 year that he missed with Tommy John surgery, and what he's accomplished in that time, I would think would answer that question. But again, going back to those inherited runners, he's the guy they go to the most when there are runners on base, and it's really not even close. He's inherited 27 runners, and only 4 have scored. So that's the guy I want in there in that situation. Clayton Kwiatkowski is another one that's been very good in those situations this year. And he's a guy that 2 years was kind of the exact opposite in that number. 2 years ago, he had, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I remember going back and calculating it out. And he went on a terrible run where it felt like everybody that was on base when he came in was able to score. Last year, he did not allow an inherited runner to score. This year, he has not allowed an inherited runner to score. Now, again, it's been far fewer opportunities than Chase, because unless it's a left-handed heavy team, they're going to Chase Haney in that situation. But, again, I think the bullpen's been so good this year, but it's been overshadowed by the starters. And, that's why – when you say, hey, I think they're capable of taking 2 out of 3 against anybody, the pitching is the reason why. That's why, we go into a weekend and I look at numbers and I go, I think we went to Louisville. I thought we had a good chance of winning that series. It didn't work out that way. But I didn't look at Louisville and think, oh, man, this is, and I remember going up to Louisville in the past and thinking that way. But I didn't feel that way about this team going up to Louisville this year. And again, because, I think the pitching on this team gives Florida State a chance every night.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it fun to watch. You kind of close your eyes at times with the infield defense. But honestly, this is why the team is so fun to watch, because they're so good pitching, not just starting, but to your point, the bullpen. It feels like there's a deeper bullpen than in past years. Yes, they go to Haney a lot. But to have Kwiatkowski, to have Jonas Scalaro, Davis Hare,
Hunter Purdue.
Yeah. And younger arms are being developed. It's not just the older veterans that you say, trust the older guys like the Haney types. they're developing younger guys here. So it's definitely positivity about the future.
Crowell's gotten some good Crowell, and he may not have pitched as much now because they've been using him as a position player, as a DH. I think we're starting to see some good innings out of Brandon Walker. So does that lead to more opportunities? Does that mean they're going to go to him more often in the 7th or 8th inning of a game that's, 1 or 2 run game with guys on base? He's another one. He's inherited 7 runners this year. None of them have scored. He walked 2 guys in his first outing and only has 2 walks since. You are starting to see Ross Dunn is another one that, his first time out this year was rough, but he's been pretty good the last couple of times out. So you start to see those guys get more opportunities, and this doesn't look like a 1-year outlier for this pitching staff. It looks like they're set up to be really good for next few years anyway.
Well, thank you, Lou. I think it's a good place for us to leave it. Florida State at Georgia Tech this weekend, 3-game series, again, starting Friday night. Florida State, Georgia Tech, 7:30. All games will be streamed on ACC Network Extra. You can, of course, catch Lulu locally, 100.7 FM. You've got the TuneIn app. You've got the FSU Game Day app. If you want to try and sync up Lulu's broadcast with the ACC Network stream, can you remind me how you do that?
I'll be honest, I'm not as familiar with the ACC Network Extra side of it. I don't know. Can you pause on that on the extra?
Yes.
Okay. You basically, if you stream the audio, if you do it off the radio will be ahead of the video on ACC Network or ACC Network Extra. But if you stream it, if you stream the audio and it's behind the video on the TV, hit your pause button on the video until you catch up to where you are on the audio portion, and then let it rip at that point.
All right. So give it a try. Check it out. You can listen to Lulu while you watch the games on the live stream. We appreciate your time as always, and we'll catch you down the road.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks again to everyone for listening. The Osceola Seminole Sidelines podcast. And enjoy the baseball this weekend.
This has been another edition of the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines. To subscribe to the Osceola, go to theosceola.com. Go Noles!